don't you start by explaining to us what pompe disease is?
Pompe disease is a glycogen storage disease type 2, where the body lacks an enzyme in the body that breaks down the fat, salts and sugars, and without this enzyme replacement therapy treatment, eventually all of the enzymes become more like consolidated, more solid, which then gets stored in between the muscles and the vital organs, which then makes the organs work in overdrive and then become enlarged, which then eventually the organs just shut down. And with different strains of Pompe disease, on the classic infantile Pompe disease, they don't make it past 1 without the treatment. With infantile Pompe disease, they can survive at the age of 8. Sometimes. It's all variant, it's all unknown, it's still not as very medically known as much. It's still, everyone's learning with this new disease and how to support it and facilitate it and treat it. So with the onset Pompe disease, some of them won't even get a reaction or any type of weakness or muscle weakness until they were like 50, 30, 20. It can happen anytime, which is the complexities of Pompe disease. It's basically a muscle degenerative disease.
So you said it's some people it can happen in later life. How soon did you know that your son was suffering from this condition?
I didn't know that he was suffering with the condition. I just knew something was wrong at about 2 months into the afterbirth. I mean, the pregnancy was normal. There was no signs of any abnormalities. So when I had the scans, there was not, the nurse or anyone wasn't saying there was something wrong with the baby in the belly. So I had none of that. Everything was normal. The delivery was normal. Everything was fine. It was just when I was breastfeeding, he was struggling to latch on the breast, and he would be almost choking on the milk. So he would...
Just for our viewers' sake, that's not abnormal in most children, is it? So how did you know that was abnormal in yours?
Because of the long-term reoccurring. So with children, I was constantly going to the doctors, which they did say, you know, it does happen, colic. It could be he's just not coping with the teeth, probably just wants to go in the bottle, which is what people probably would go to, but I refused. I was at the point of syringing the breast milk in, because my personal belief is a breastfeeding is a good start to a baby's life. So I was pretty much at that point still am pro breastfeeding to help give the child a good start, even if it is for about, you know, it could be as little as anything of like breastfeed for 2 weeks. You've still done an amazing job. You've still given that baby a really good start. But I pushed it with Leo for 6 months. Anyway, back on the topic. There was just abnormalities that he was struggling to keep the food down even. He'd be vomiting, guzzled the milk down, he'd vomit it. It'd be like he'd choke and couldn't swallow the fluid. So I kept on going to the doctors every month and asking them for their help. So I'd the doctors about this concern, and they would say, oh, it's just colic. So they'd give me Diorolite and send me off. And it didn't solve the answer. He kept on struggling. So I reached out to the breastfeeding community to like, am I breastfeeding wrong? I'm a first time mum. I'm only about 20 at this point. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm going to ask as much as help from the professionals as possible, which is common sense. You should do that. So the breastfeeding team turned up to my house, and I was told to show how he would latch onto my breast, if I'm doing it right or I'm doing it wrong. He latched on. They were like, you've done a great job, there's no issue, I've got no concern, you're not doing it wrong. But I was telling them, he's doing it now, but give him half an hour, he's going to vomit and not stomach this. And how he's drinking it, he's not coping. When he gets to a certain point when he suckles, it's like he just chokes on it, he can't swallow. He's struggling with swallowing is pretty much what I was dots. They were like, no, you're doing fine. Left. I was a bit...
So do you feel like there's some kind of reluctance to diagnose him with anything at this point?
No, I just think that they thought I was a young mum and I didn't know what I was doing, which I didn't know what I was doing, but at the same time I just felt they were I was quite naive and just being over panicky, which was...
And when you say young, Mum, how young were you?
I was 20.
You were 20?
Yeah, I said I was 20.
That's a reasonable age.
It's a reasonable age, but it's still young because this is where the conversation doesn't get really fun, because it took... Yeah, because of my age, it's caused a lot of issues with my son. So yeah, breastfeeding was one of them. And then when it got to 4 to 5 months, I was noticing he wasn't keeping his head up. He was not as mobile. He slept a lot. And again, I brought this up to the doctors. They were just like, you know, he's a baby. Everyone's different. Every child's different. It was just, again, basically pushed aside. So I was just thinking, I'm being a hypochondriac. I'm being over the top. I need to just listen to the doctors because they know what they're talking about. Big mistake. So then after that, it got to the point where I was seeing my friends with their babies, and they were keeping their heads up, eating, drinking, and, you know, I was like, what's going on? Why is my baby not like theirs? What am I doing that's wrong? What have I done? What am I doing? I don't know what... I'm going to the doctors and all I'm getting is he's fine. I'm raising these concerns with these doctors and all I'm getting is he's just a baby, it's fine. And that was the recurring issue that I kept on having with these doctors. And there was one point when I got to about 5 months, I raised to a doctor that he's floppy, he's not, you know, he's in his activities chairs, he's, you know, it's not like he was just left to his own devices. He was in an activities chair where he could walk around, and he would, but he'd flop while he's doing it, so he would struggle to walk, but it'd be a lot of work, and you could see it working in his chest and working breathing.
Where was your partner in all this? Was he helping you out?
No, he was working a lot. So at the time, my ex, he was working a lot, so I just got on with it. It didn't bother me. So I felt a bit lonely, to be honest, in the end, because it was just me and Leo trying to fight to get this, you know, what's wrong with him? He's not right. No, it got to the point where I went to this doctor, back to this, where he was floppy, and the doctor looked at him and said, no, he's just lazy. Boys are lazy, and it's fine, put him in the bouncer. And I pleaded with the doctor, no, something's wrong, and, you know, I have been doing this. It's like, no, he's just lazy. He's a boy. All boys are lazy, because my friends who had their kids were girls. So this doctor referred him as, he's just a boy, so he's just lazy. My boys were lazy. So basically, it is what it is. It got to the point where I was breaking down, I was crying, I was like, you know, am I a bad mum? Because that's when it started to turn to myself that I'm a really shit mum. So it was not nice. But my ex-mother-in-law helped me a little bit with his feeding. We did adjust to sort on his feeding temporarily. It worked with a low flow bottle. This is about 5 to 6 month mark. A low flow teat, so it was easier to suckle out without him working so hard to suckle the milk out. So I would express my milk in the bottle, and he would have it via bottle. And it worked, it did work. But then, it after about 2 to 3 weeks, it went back to the usual. He would projectile vomit the milk, he couldn't stomach, he was choking on it. It was like, as he was drinking it, he was immediately vomiting it up. It wasn't staying down. So I had to do an emergency booking with the doctors about, this is in, about between mid 5 months to 6 months. He was vomiting as I was getting on the phone to the doctor, running up there to, like, he's vomiting again. It's quite severe. So the doctors went to see me, and there was a student doctor and an actual other doctor, like the main one. He was just there to witness. And as I sat him up, he projectile vomited, and they all, whoa, what the hell? And I was relieved in a way that, oh my God, they're going to finally see that I'm not crazy. I'm, you know, he isn't tolerating it. I'm not going to get fobbed off with diorolite again. I'm not going to get fobbed
Labelled
off.
as a hypochondriac.
Yeah, like an unstable mum. It really stressed me out. And it was fine. It was like, oh my God. Until the doctor turned around to me and said, is there something you're not telling us? Because I broke down in tears at this point and I lost my shit. I was like, how dare you? Every month since this child has been born, I've been coming here asking for your help, knowing that there's something wrong, and you've battered me aside because I'm a young mum. It's literally, that is what it was. I was a young mum. Didn't know what I was talking about. Didn't handle a kid. And they just left me to it. No emotional support. You know, what if I was dealing with depression and they just, you know, I could have been a mum that was in a bad depression. They didn't offer any support. They didn't go, you know what, maybe you need to go to mum group. Maybe you need some support. None of that. It was get lost. Stop being paranoid. Stop being silly. He's your child. And it made me feel like a shit mum. At that point, when he did vomit, they rushed him into hospital. Again, thought I was getting somewhere at this point. I was like, thank God, you know, had a go with them. They, as soon as I stood up, as soon as when I said, when he said, have you done anything? Is there something you're not telling us? It was immediate, like, what the fuck? Kicked off at them. They were like, sorry, we didn't mean it in that way. Well, what other way do you mean? You know what I mean? It was just, it was horrible. It was just a horrible time. We finally got to hospital. All they did was put him on an saturation monitor, monitored him for 4 hours, sent me home with diarrhea, and I was like deflated, absolutely deflated, and gone, I've gone through all this for nothing. It was horrible. And it got to the point that my ex-mother-in-law got sick and tired of the back and forth, that she was like, I'm going to take him out, I'm going to take him to the doctors. Immediately after she's took him to the doctors, he got a blood test and they did an x-ray.
Do you feel that's an age thing then?
Yeah, she's 50, like nearly 50 at this point. She's an older woman, and she explained that she told the exact same concerns I expressed to the doctors, which pissed me off. And they did a blood test and they did an x-ray, and guess what? His heart was enlarged. He had a very enlarged heart, which then led us to go into all the hay. And later, we finally was like, at this point, yes, okay, now we knew something's wrong. So, at that point, we were waiting around for a while, a good week in Alder Hay for answers, because we were in the, we got put in the, this was the old Alder Hay before it was done up. It was about 2014, this year. After that, we stayed there for a week in the cardiac ward, because kids were coming out with open heart surgery, and it's quite horrific. It was like a battlefield when you're being introduced from normal life to then being shoved in a ward with poor kids with just like, they've just come out of surgery, and it's very overwhelming. And then your son's being put in there. It's like, what the hell? Is my son going to need immediate emergency heart surgery? So they did the blood test and all the hay. Another fun thing what they didn't do, which is not professional, again, one of the doctors approached me and said, we're going to send you to Manchester. We haven't got the blood results back yet, but just on a protocol for some of the diagnoses, they're more trained. They know what they're talking about. So we're going to just send you to Manchester just to be on the safe side. My ex was with me at this point. Obviously, he was called out of work, and during all this diagnosis process, he was there with me. Obviously feeling the same, overwhelmed, stressed. So we went to Manchester. He went in a separate car with the mother-in-law to follow the ambulance that I was in with my son Liam. As we got to Manchester, we settled in, got on this Ward 85 metabolic condition ward that we were put on. Didn't know what the hell I was walking into, didn't know what the hell was going on. Like, okay, he's got an enlarged heart. No one's told me anything. No doctors have informed me of what's going on. And as soon as someone walked in, and I can't say a name for legal reasons, a nurse came in and said, hello, I'm the pompe nurse. And I was like, what? I haven't got, nothing's wrong with my son. You don't, why are you talking to me? She was like, didn't they tell you? Tell me what? Alder Hey, didn't they tell you? No, they told me I was going to come from Alder Hey to you for a possible diagnosis. And she was like, no, they already knew. Why didn't they? And it was like, well, don't, immediately I shut down. I was like, don't talk to me. My partner isn't here yet. He's behind the ambulance. Don't talk to me. And it was just like, he's got this disease. And it was just heartbreaking because it was just so unprofessional of Alder Hey that they knew what was going on with my son but didn't have the heart to tell me he's got this condition, you're going to Manchester. You know, when the nurse came in, she was coming in as if I was already informed of this. I wasn't informed, and it was just so unprofessionally managed for a mother like me who's been fighting since the day that he was born to get something was wrong with my child, knowing something was wrong but getting told nothing is, it's just all in my head, essentially, which was really, really frustrating, and it was challenging. But at this point in Manchester, we finally got our diagnosis. It was, as much as it was good to know that finally we got an answer what was wrong with our child, I remember just being so, when they were telling me about it, I was so numb. I was so just in and out of conversation as explaining about the disease and what it entails and what it does. But it was just a relief, but also tiring, because it shouldn't have took that long, because at this point he was 7 months, between 6 months to then moving to 7 months, and I can't believe it took so long.
What would his life expectancy be then if he didn't get the diagnosis?
He would have died. He was at the point where he was gonna.
Sometime within that 6 or 7 months.
What the pompe nurse told me, because at that point when I did speak to the doctors, I completely forgot about this. Sorry, I'm gonna say it now. While I was trying to get him diagnosed in the GP, they did book an appointment for a blood test about a month. He would have been about 9 months, 8 months at that point, for I think just to please me, because I was hounding them or annoying them, essentially, is what I was getting the vibe from. The pompe nurse said that he wouldn't be here if you would have waited for that blood result in a few months' time. He wouldn't be here, wouldn't be having this conversation, he wouldn't have made it. And it was just that lack of medical negligence when a mother is trying to, even if it wasn't even Pompe disease, you could clearly see I was distressed, and no one offered me, do you need mental health support? Any of that? It just enraged me, because it was just, I don't get it. I feel like I do love, I'm not against NHS, because, again, there is pros and cons, and it's fabulous, and, there are ups and downs, but from my first initial getting to understand and being put in this situation, it wasn't a very good start to me liking the NHS at this point. But I will say, just to end this video, this episode, we did get a diagnosis, and it does get a bit harder at this point. And what I want other mums to think on with this episode is you're not alone in this. It's horrible. You're crazy, and the symptoms are, as what I've learnt, is a weak swallow, because the first muscle to go with Pompe disease is the mouth. So the baby will vomit, aspirate, because it can't swallow, it's not got the muscles. First muscle to go when it's born. Didn't know that until the Pompe nurse explained that while she was discussing to me about the diagnosis in depth more in Manchester. And then the heart is affected. So the floppiness as well is a part of that. So weak mouth, weak feeding with the swallowing, and it's a very obvious thing. Your baby can't even pick its head up, and it sleeps a lot of the day. which means the baby is trying to maintain his body to function by resting all the time. And then that's when the heart is overworked to the point that it gets the muscle gets big that it shuts down. But yeah.
Before we end the episode, let's just touch on a few more subjects around it, because obviously you've had your diagnosis, and that was a struggle to get to. There are good support communities out there that we've discovered, and you've helped advise people in the past through these communities. So there are good support communities out there, even not just for Pompe, but other children with similar conditions. What was life like after the diagnosis? Because you spent quite a lot of time up in Manchester, stuck in a hospital, and I feel like that's an experience that some people may be going through that they may need to relate to.
We were up there for the first diagnosis for 5 months because we needed to see how he tolerated the enzyme treatment therapy, and then at first he started with IV treatments. So at that point, because there's no cure for Pompe disease. That's it. There's no cure. There's no treatment that can fix it. The treatment, I can't stress this a lot, is it just stabilises and keeps the progression of the disease at bay. So when he was on this treatment, he's on it weekly for the rest of his life. At the early stages, that's what I thought he was going to stay on, is weekly. He was on it weekly, and then he needed to go into surgery to get a port put in his leg. Originally, that was his first one. That was not a pleasant experience. It was quite horrific because, again, I felt like there was no guidebook to go, this is what you expect. Because the thing is with hospitals and doctors, they see this every day. So they're a little bit not as emotionally disconnected. It. Yeah, that's the problem. And sometimes they do come across, they're nice people. I'm not saying they're nasty, but they do come across cold-hearted a little bit, and it's a bit insensitive. And you're sitting in a pile of shit like, my baby, I'm going to lose my baby. And everyone else is just going, this is happening now. We're going to do this now. Leave the room. Leave you with that information. You're dwelling on that information. Okay, they come in the room, right, it's going to get done. It's just constantly adapting to this new life that we had to adapt to, which we did, and obviously did. So he's still here to this day, by the way. Not to say a negative, he's currently in school, so positive note, because what I want to do is not dwell on the negatives, but I will say the beginning of it was quite negative, but there is a positive way of looking at this. Is my son got a diagnosis and I was able to move forward, and I wasn't what I feared I was, which was a bad mum.
Definitely not.
No.
No, from experience, you're not a bad mum. But you ended up spending a bit more than 5 months in the hospital, didn't you? I think.
So, not at that point, no. Not when it got to that point. So, it was a lot of back and forth. So, when we first got the diagnosis, we were there for 5 months. We came home. And as we came home, it was like, we were there for about 2 months, then he'd have a chest infection, and then we'd get, Arrow Park would go, holy shit, he is complicated, we don't want to touch him.
Yeah, Arrow Park have improved in recent years. They have his own room. They've been very good with us. Yeah, we're not dissing Arrow Park, but it's a very rare disease and it was very complex.
I don't want to diss any professional medical things. I will say the GPs are the ones that really failed, and I will stand by that. The GPs in New Ferry were terrible. Sorry, I'm not. I even looked at their notes because I wanted to take this further with how I was treated, and I looked at their note. I bought the notes like medical records, so you get to see what the doctors have written about you while you're having this appointment. And one of them just noted on the thing, questionable about him mothering skills, and it was just like,
how dare you?
How dare you? I'm coming to you for help. It's not like I'm hiding anything. I'm telling you everything. And, you didn't even offer me that help. Mothering skills, you just wrote it in your notes. It didn't go, do you need any help? It was just noted in as mothering skills. So basically they were just assuming I was just a shit mum who just didn't know what I was doing. Again, back to the topic of that question. What was the question again?
Basically, like, the time you spent in hospital, because, like, from my knowledge, from what you've told me in the past, that essentially turned into 4 years. That's like the experience I want to try and relate to our viewers.
So when he ended up, at this point, he was not trachea ventilated at this point, so he was on a BiPAP machine at night times, and that was it at that point. He was on saline nerves where he just needed a mask to release his secretions, because that was one of the main things he did struggle with quite a lot with, and he'd choke. So I think because of his weak muscle and the saliva, it caused a lot of chest infections essentially. And sadly, it's another doozy with the not very good hospital skills, was he was on an NG, and he only meant to be on an NG because they stopped him from eating, so they obviously had to NG and pump feed him the milk. But he was only meant to be on that for 6 weeks, and he ended up being on an NG for 4 years. It took that long for Manchester's surgeons to move their arses to just get him in and put a gastro in, and that really enraged me. Because I believe, my opinion, I'm not a doctor or anything, but from my experience, that NG was growing bacteria, and I feel like when he would cough, you could see the NG move up and down in his nose, and that moving up in your throat, a piece of, an NG tube down your throat.
It's basically a
That's going to
bridge.
make you gag. Then it's going to make you gag and he'd vomit.
Yeah.
So every time he'd cough and sneeze, Leo would go, and it would be like, oh God. And then some of that would go in his lung, and then that's why you get a chest infection when you aspirate. So I think the back and forth with Manchester was triggered by, I personally think the NG, that needed to be addressed. It never got addressed while I was in Manchester. So we'd go home for the first diagnosis for 5 months.